Hello and welcome to another episode of the Celtic Transfer Special. This time we'll be focusing on Celtic, and joining me, Craig Turnbull, to discuss all the latest comings and goings from Parkhead is David Friel.
Craig,
and David, good, thank you. And David, what do you think of, well, one place to start is Nicolas Kuhn to Como?
Yeah, quite remarkable, big, huge transfer so early in the window as well, Craig, and just fascinating to see how it's all played out over the last couple of weeks. I think, you know, ever since the story about Red Bull Leipzig being interested in him, it's kind of really it's kind of gone on and on and on. Then Como obviously entered the race. It'd gone a wee bit quiet for a few days, but then yesterday it kind of exploded into life again. Como agreeing a €20 million deal, equates to about £17 million for Nicolas Kuhn, and I don't know what the German word is for gazumped, but it feels as if Leipzig have been gazumped. I think they felt they probably had him. Kind of led to believe that deal was pretty far down the line. I noticed some German colleagues this morning are saying that they were surprised they got a phone call on Thursday afternoon to basically tell them that Nicolas Kuhn wouldn't be going to RB Leipzig. And I know Friday morning there's some stuff coming out of Germany saying that he is getting offered twice the money to go to Como and all that sort of stuff. I don't know the ins and outs in terms of the transfer. All I know is that Como haven't wasted any time. Cesc Fabregas, obviously a huge name in world football, has taken a real personal interest in this transfer, has spoken to Nicolas Kuhn, and it appears that the player was given a straight choice in the end between going back to Leipzig or going to Italy with Como, and he's chosen Serie A.
How do you assess the move overall? Is this a good deal for all parties involved, do you think?
Yeah, look, I think it's at a level of money that Celtic probably couldn't turn down, and I think, as I said, and I think in our last videos, a key component of this is, does Nicolas Kuhn want to go? Does he want to move on? And by the looks of it, he does. You know, whether it's because it's a top 5 European league, whether he feels that the Como project is an exciting one, an ambitious one. I mean, I think by the end of this transfer window, they'll probably have spent well in excess of €100 million. So they clearly want to have a go and try to get into Europe next season. I think they finished 10th in Serie A last season. For Celtic, look, it's a huge profit on a £3 million fee 18 months ago for a player who I think at his very, very best is an exceptional talent. You know, we saw, I think in the 18 months of Nicolas Kuhn at Celtic, I think we have seen the absolute best of him and the worst of him. There are games where he does go missing. However, when he's on his game, when he's at full throttle, I think he's an excellent footballer, and you see coming in off that right wing how deadly he can be, and he's a really clever footballer as well. His pace is unquestioned as well. So look, Celtic are losing a very good player, but I think the deal was at a level where they couldn't say no, and I think the player clearly wants to go.
Well, how difficult will it be to replace somebody like Nicolas Kuhn, do you think?
Yeah, it's difficult, but that's where Celtic need to trust their model, need to trust their scouting, and need to look at things and say, well, look, you should always, if you're getting a deal that you really can't say no to, and you have a player who wants to go, then you just have to say, right, who's next off the cab rank almost. You know, Celtic always plan for these kind of exits. And I remember Brendan Rodgers towards the end of the season, and maybe this was a nod to Nicolas Kuhn, because I don't think this is really taking Celtic by surprise, this interest, saying, I think the word he used, agile. Celtic need to be agile in the market now. I know Celtic will have a long list of targets, they'll be looking at them just now, they'll probably be doing work on some of them right now, and probably will be far down the line with some. Now, that's not to say they got over that line, but Celtic will have expected this to happen. I don't think it's been any secret over the last couple of months that Nicolas Kuhn was heading for an exit. It's happened very early in the window, but in a way that gives Celtic more time to replace him.
Yeah, and just kind of thinking about the contract details, he's due to fly to Como next week for a medical. Do we know anything in terms of the sell-on fee or anything that might be involved in that?
That's not been sort of declared yet. It looks like a 4-year deal he's going to say, and as I said, you know, it's clearly coming from Germany that this is a huge wage for him, so he's going to get a big salary bump. Celtic will have to pay probably a little bit, I would imagine, to Rapid Vienna in terms of the sell-on. It's normally a sell-on in terms of profit. I don't know the details, but you would imagine that as well. And then also the report that Ajax might be due just a bit of solidarity payments because they had him as a kid as well. So listen, we'll see, but I think it's fair to say that overall this is a massive deal for Celtic, a massive deal for Nicolas Kuhn. He'll go with Celtic's best wishes, but the focus now turns to who Celtic replace him with.
Exactly, and how much cash do you think Brendan Rodgers will be able to get from this transfer to reinvest in the squad?
I don't think it ever really works like that. I think if you look, Celtic are a very wealthy club, they're a very well-run club, and they have a lot of money in the bank, but I think if you know, there will be supporters moaning about a lack of let's just go and spend 15 million, let's spend 20 million. That will never be the case at Celtic in a sense. They're not just going to throw money at it without having a rational business plan. And I think if you look at Celtic over, certainly last summer, the Matarelli money, which was the guts of 30 million, was pretty much reinvested in the team. In January there, Celtic get about 10 million for Kyogo. It was instantly reinvested for Jota. I think this summer already Celtic did get a little bit of money, or a fair bit of money from the Jeremy Frimpong to Liverpool deal. They're obviously going to get a decent profit from Nicolas Kuhn. There will be other outgoings, and there's obviously cash in the bank there. So I think Celtic will reinvest what they bring in, and maybe a bit more so. In terms of what kind of budget Brendan Rodgers gets, I don't think it necessarily works like that. I think Celtic look at everything deal by deal. There's money there to spend, there'll be more money there to spend. However, they look at what deal they can get and what's a good deal in the end.
In your mind, who do you think will be their top targets?
There's so many wingers flying about in terms of names and all that sort of stuff. You know, we've spoken over the summer about Michel-Ange Balikwisha, about Sondre Origaster. We have spoken about so many. I'm sure there are a few others. I know there are a few others that Celtic will be looking at. However, it all comes down to as I said, what's the best deal? What's the value? Does Celtic go for an experienced one that they feel they can still get a few years out of? Do they just go for a project type? Do they go for someone in between? I think that'll all be getting discussed just now, but I would guarantee that before the end of the window, I would imagine Celtic sign at least 2 new wingers.
Well, Celtic fans, just let us know what you think of the Nicolas Kuhn move and the top targets that Brendan Rodgers should be trying to attract to the club. Moving on, Rodgers this week has been speaking about the need to kind of refresh the squad, and I think we're starting to see the kind of wheels in motion for that. Yeah,
I mean, you just look at the Greg Taylor news. Obviously, that's been a saga. It finally came to an end when he signed for PAOK. Brendan Rodgers was very open. He wanted him to stay. Greg Taylor was very open. It was the toughest decision of his career. In the end, he decided that a fresh start, a fresh challenge in Greece was his best option. As I've kept saying about Greg Taylor, we've spoken about Greg Taylor's situation for months. I don't blame him for looking elsewhere, and I don't mean that in terms of he was fed up with Celtic. I think you just get to a stage in your career where you think maybe he's done as much as he can. He spoke about that. He made it clear it wasn't just because Kieran Tierney was arriving, and that he'd already seen off a lot of left backs at Celtic. And look, that is true. See, when you think Alessandro Bernabé, volleyball and goalie, even others who have come in, Greg Taylor has just kept going, made himself a regular. Look, I'm not saying that he would have got a game in front of Kieran Tierney every week. I think it was a different challenge because you're talking about a different calibre of player in terms of the other ones he's been up against. However, I just feel Greg Taylor, I totally understand at his stage in his life, new father, just get married, that he maybe thinks, look, let's see what else is out there. But I think he's been an excellent Celtic player. But as you say, that refreshing of the squad has already started. Jeffrey Schlupp, nobody's talking about him now. It looks as if he won't be coming back. And then you've got Maik Nawrocki, who's also going. That will be a loan with an option for a permanent transfer to Hanover. I feel there's a player in Maik Nawrocki. I just wonder if he's robust enough, durable enough to play for Celtic. Can he play 60 games a season? I don't know if he can. And I think at his stage in his career, I understand why he wants to go out and play just first team football and play regular games. I don't think he was going to get it at Celtic, and to me it's one of the ones where I think again the player just wants to go and Celtic aren't going to stand in his way.
I mean, you touched on it last week about Celtic's need to perhaps have a partnership, a player for Cameron Carter-Vickers to play alongside. It looks a wee bit as though they're trying to shift the decks a wee bit in that area. Yeah,
I think that's understandable. I mean, I hadn't even mentioned Gustaf Lagerbielke, who's about to go to Braga. That looks as if that will be confirmed shortly. That'll be a €2 million, £2 million deal as well. I think like Nawrocki, Nawrocki was clearly up the pecking order compared to Lagerbielke, but again, like him, it's a deal for Celtic that he wasn't going to feature regularly. I think Celtic, if they can get some money back for their investment on Lagerbielke, it looks as if they're going to get 2/3 of it back, then I think it's good business again. I think the player realises he's not going to play for Celtic, so Braga's a great club in a very good league, so that's a sensible one as well. But yeah, look, it's understandable. We spoke, I think last week, about how Celtic are probably 7 or 8 centre-halves. Now they're going to get rid of 2 in the coming days anyway, so that does clear the decks, and I do wonder, going forward in the window, where it is a position Celtic look to properly strengthen.
Do you sense, and you kind of touched on it earlier, there is a wee bit of kind of fan discontent around, there's not really been that big name signing to get them excited this window so far?
I think it's always natural. Look, supporters want everything today. They want all the money spent and all that sort of stuff. But look, I've been pretty consistent with this. Kieran Tierney is an outstanding signing for Celtic. He makes Celtic better. And as I said, Benjamin Nygren will be one of the, if not the best bit of business Celtic do in this transfer window. So I think Celtic have improved the team in terms, I think they've got 2 starters in. Obviously Nicolas Kuhn would probably be a first choice. So they've lost him, but I think they'll do business. But look, it's early July. Celtic don't have a competitive game for a month. They don't have a Champions League playoff for 7 weeks. So look, Celtic will do a lot more business. They are working on a lot of deals just now. A lot of players will go. Fans, I understand impatience, all that sort of stuff, but I would be very calm about things just now.
We were kind of looking at it before we came on air there, just about, there is another possibly 7-8 players that could also be heading for the exits at Celtic.
Yeah, I think by the time the transfer window finishes, you could easily look at Celtic, I don't want to use the term shipping out, but letting 12, 13 players go. I mean, we've already spoken about Kuhn, about Taylor, Schlupp's gone, Scott Bain's gone to Falkirk. That was a sensible one again. I think he wants to go and play football. He'd done his bit. Celtic bringing Ross Doohan, perfect replacement for him. Lagerbielke. And then you look at others that there is interest in. There's been talk of Yang. I'm not sure if I was Celtic I would let Yang go just yet. Look, I think he is a player who has struggled for consistency. I think it can sometimes be hard for him when he's only coming on for maybe 20 minutes. But I think he's shown flashes last season that maybe there is a player in there, and he's a South Korean international. I wouldn't be in a rush probably to get rid of Yang. I'm not saying he's going to be an automatic starter by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think there's a player in there that could be handy to have around. I know Legia Warsaw have been linked with him. Talking to a colleague in Poland, he would be very surprised if Legia had the money, say 3-4 million, to go and make that a permanent deal. So I'm not sure about that one. And then there's others. Look, you look at interest in others, some of the younger ones too. Young Adam Montgomery, who's been about the scene. Really good loan spell at St Johnstone, then had terrible injury issues. You wonder what his future holds. Matthew Anderson's already gone to Kortrijk in Belgium. Kwon, who was alone at St Mirren, then alone at Hibs. Is he going to feature for Celtic's first team? I doubt it. I just don't think he's of the calibre. I'm not saying he can't go and have a good, decent career somewhere, but I just don't think he's going to play for Celtic. You would imagine Celtic would look to get him out. He touched in centre half. Stephen Welsh is another one. Spent the second half of last season at Mechelen. Did very well by all accounts. I would imagine Celtic maybe keep him around just now, especially if Lagerbielke's gone and Nawrocki, but come the end of the window, if Celtic can get a centre half in, does Stephen Welsh go out too? And there's probably other ones that we've not even covered yet.
Louis Palmer maybe?
Louis Palmer, another one. He's obviously in Gold Cup duty with Honduras. Again, I would be surprised if Louis Palmer has a future at Celtic. I just feel for all the talent that's there, and he's clearly a very gifted footballer, capable of brilliance at times. I just don't think he's got the engine, the pace, the work rate for Brendan Rodgers. You look at a Brendan Rodgers team, you look at what he wants from his wingers. He wants aggressive pressing, he wants pace. And I don't think Louis Palmer really brings that to the table, even though he is a very capable footballer, as he's shown with his goal in the Gold Cup last week. Yeah, look, I think he'll go as well, and look, there's probably are more. I don't think we've even touched on Marco Tilio. Everybody forgets about Marco Tilio, another winger, who had a good loan spell back at Melbourne City, looks a lot fitter, got himself back into the Socceroos squad. He can actually come on as a sub against Saudi Arabia in early June. He's probably due back. Does he have a future at Celtic? Will Celtic look to ship him out as well? Who knows? There's going to be so many players leave the club, but I think it shows that Celtic's squad, if you actually look at the first team squad as a whole, it's still a bit bloated, and I think Brendan Rodgers has also been pretty clear that he wants space for a young guy like Jude Bonner, Sean McArdle, guys like that who can come in and maybe start to get more minutes than they did last season.
Yeah, one name that kind of was attracting a lot of interest before he got injured against Aberdeen was Rio Hatate.
Yeah.
What's the kind of latest with him?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what Brendan Rodgers gives in terms of an update in terms of his fitness over the weekend. He was the one, Craig, that I felt at the end of the season would be, or towards the end of the season, had done his bit for Celtic almost. I felt he was kind of primed for a move, and that this would be the summer for him to go. I'm now thinking that it might still happen. However, I just wonder whether, especially with Kuhn going, that Celtic would not sell Rio Hatate before the playoff. I just think that if he can get himself back fit, he's going to be such a crucial player for Celtic over those 2 legs in a pretty defining game of the season. I think Celtic would have to be very careful in the sense that if you are losing one of your starters, albeit Benjamin Negrin could be seen as the ideal replacement for Nicolas Kuhn, I think you need to be very careful if you lose another one before that playoff. Celtic are under no pressure to sell. I also look at Rio Hatate and I wonder at his age, what kind of move is he going to get? I think he's an exceptional footballer. I think there's an argument to say he's arguably Celtic's best player on his day. However, is he at his age going to get a top club in a top 5 league? I'm not so sure. Udinese have been linked with him in the past. I think he's probably better than that. However, I just look at the value for any buying club, a value for Celtic as a selling club. I would kind of watch this space with that one just now. I think Rio Hatate's first job and first task will be to get himself fit after that injury he picked up at Aberdeen towards the end of the season, and then we'll see what happens with him. Speaking
of value, Motherwell's Lennon Miller, he is one of the most kind of up and coming stars in Scotland. Would Celtic think about?
Yeah, listen, Celtic like Lennon Miller. They have liked him for a long time. They looked at him in January. I think spoke to Motherwell about him in January. It never materialised in necessarily that big, huge bid for him that would, for Motherwell to turn down. But I also think with Lennon Miller, you need to take into consideration what the player wants. And I think if Lennon Miller's agent picked up the phone to Celtic to say he wants to come to Celtic, they would do a deal. I don't think there's any question about that. However, I think the one person with the biggest insight into Lennon Miller is his dad, Lee, who made it clear that he fancies a crack at football abroad. I think he's looked at Aaron Hickey, Billy Gilmour, Scott McTominay, Greg Taylor now, look at James Penrice, signing for AEK Athens from Hearts. And I think Lennon Miller, Lewis Ferguson's another one that I think he just feels that it's maybe, for his development, the best option is to go abroad. Now, there has to be bids from abroad, there has to be acceptable bids and attractive bids from abroad. So I would never ever rule Celtic out the race for Lennon Miller. However, my gut feeling is he'll probably end up abroad.
And just in terms of the top of the park with the strikers, do you feel as though Celtic maybe are light in that position? Yeah,
but again, it will probably depend on what happens winger-wise. Look, Shin Yamada's a player of interest. He is still playing just now for Kawasaki Frontale, but has just been called up to the Japan, it's almost like a Japan B squad for a mini tournament that starts next week against, I think it's Hong Kong, South Korea and China. That's a fringe squad it's a Japan squad made up of J-League players, and Yamada has been called up to that. So I do wonder if Celtic are going to push a button on that might delay things slightly, because I don't think that tournament finishes until about the 17th of July. He's a player they're looking at. I think Daisen Maeda is a striker for Celtic now, who can play off the wing. Adam Ida's there. Johnny Kenny, by all accounts, is impressed in pre-season training so far. Cal McGregor was raving about him the other day. You wonder with him, what's his future? He's one we didn't mention in terms of potential exits, but if he comes back flying for pre-season, does Brendan Rodgers think, there you go? Callum Osman's come in. Again, he's a player Brendan Rodgers will look at in pre-season and find out is his development best served, like we've spoken about previously, staying for 6 months or going straight out on loan. We'll see what happens with that one as well. But I think Celtic will always keep an eye on the striker thing. Yamada's clearly a player they like, but it might depend how much success or how quickly they can get wingers in, because that would then probably decide where Daisen Maeda plays.
Yeah, and we'll see how that kind of squad refresh looks over the coming days and weeks ahead. David, thanks so much for your time as ever, and thank you for watching at home. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the Scottish Sun YouTube channel. Remember to like that as well. And there's lots of great content, including Derek McGregor's one-on-one exclusives. And of course, you can keep up to date on all kind of Scottish football news on all our platforms.